We only keep things that truly have value in this house. That was what my son's wife said at my grandson's baptism in front of more than 80 guests. Then she picked up the old wooden music box my late wife had left behind, laughed, and dropped it straight into the trash. Everyone laughed. Even my son stayed silent. I did not argue. I simply walked over, picked it up, and took it home. That night my phone rang at 10:17. My son's voice was shaking. "Dad, what did Mom hide inside that box? If you made it past that opening, thank you. Genuinely. Now tell me something, where in the world are you right now? Drop your city or country below. You'd be surprised how far these stories travel. Just so you know, some details in this story are fictional, shaped for depth and meaning. Names and settings are coincidental, but what it teaches, that stays. I want to tell you about the most beautiful room I've ever walked into, and how I stood there watching the most precious thing I'd ever carried get dropped into a trash can. Not by accident, not by mistake, by a hand that let go on purpose. It was a Sunday afternoon in September, the kind of New England day that makes you forget summer is almost over, warm enough for the women to wear their light dresses, bright enough to make a rented mansion in Newton look like something out of a magazine. And that's exactly what it was supposed to look like. My daughter-in-law Victoria had made sure of that. The reception hall was stunning, I'll give her that. White peonies in tall glass vases, a balloon arch in 3 shades of champagne gold, a catering table lined with tiny French pastries that probably cost more than my first car. There was a backdrop near the entrance, navy blue velvet, Noah's name spelled out in gold script, and Victoria's friend Brooke was already moving through the crowd with her phone raised, filming everything like she was documenting a movie premiere. 80 guests easy. Everyone dressed sharp, everyone laughing the way people laugh when they know the camera might catch them. I found a chair near the edge of the room, the kind of spot the grandfather is supposed to sit, and I held my cloth bag in my lap and tried to feel the weight of what was inside it. The gift opening was the main event. Victoria sat in a high-backed white chair under the balloon arch like a throne, and Brooke positioned herself front and center, phone steady. Gail, Victoria's mother, stood nearby, ready to narrate every box and ribbon like a play-by-play announcer. One by one, the gifts came forward. A cashmere onesie from a designer I'd never heard of. A diaper bag that probably cost more than a month of my pension. A stroller with a name like a sports car. Each one was lifted for the camera. Each one got a brand name, a squeal, a thank you tag waved at the phone. The room applauded on cue. It was a performance and everyone knew their part. Then Gail lifted my cloth bag and read the little tag attached to the handle. "From Grandpa Harold," she announced, and I heard it, that faint, polite softness in her voice, the kind you use for a child's crayon drawing. A few guests said, "Aw." I stood up and walked forward. "This is from Eleanor and me," I said, setting the bag down in front of Victoria. "From Noah's grandmother." Victoria reached into the bag and pulled out the music box. It was walnut wood polished to a warm glow, with a small brass keyhole on the front, and no logo, no brand name, nothing to announce itself to anyone. Her fingers moved over it slowly, assessing. I watched her face. I watched her register that it was old, that it was handmade, that it had no price tag she could read. She turned the little brass key. The opening notes of "At Last" filled the room, that slow, honey-warm melody by Etta James, the song Eleanor and I had danced to on our wedding night, the song this box had been playing for 45 years. In that bright, noisy, expensive room, it was the only sound that wasn't trying to impress anyone. Victoria's nose wrinkled, just slightly, just enough. "Who still gives something like this in 2025? She said, and she laughed. Not a mean laugh, just a light, casual laugh aimed straight at Brooke's camera. My son Daniel was standing near the wall with a drink in his hand. He laughed too. "Dad always lives in the past," he said, And even as the words came out of his mouth, I saw something flicker across his face, a hesitation, something that almost looked like doubt. But it was gone before it finished. Victoria wasn't done. She looked around the room at her guests, at the camera, at the beautiful life she had built, and was now performing for an audience, and she made a calculation. I could see her making it. "We only keep things that are truly valuable," she said, her voice rising just enough to carry. "Modern things. Nobody wants an old music box. What year do they even think it is?" And she stood up from her throne, crossed to the tall steel trash can at the end of the gift table, and dropped it in. The music box hit the bottom of the can with a dull, hollow sound. At last, kept playing inside it, muffled now like someone singing from the bottom of a well. Several guests laughed. The nervous kind, the follow-the-leader kind, where everyone waits for the most powerful person in the room to tell them what's funny, and then they laugh because it's easier than not laughing. Brooke kept filming. Gail pressed her hand to her chest and looked delighted. And my son, my Daniel, stood against that wall with his jaw tight and his mouth open and his eyes on the trash can and his feet absolutely still. He could have crossed the room in 4 steps. He could have said something, anything. Instead, his mouth closed. His hand tightened around his glass, and he looked down at his shoes. That was the worst moment of the whole afternoon. Not the music box in the trash. Not Victoria's laugh. My son's mouth closing. Victoria turned back to the gift table, bright-smiled for Brooke, and reached for the next box. The room exhaled and rearranged itself. Someone started talking about the catering. Gail began pointing out the flower arrangements to a woman nearby. The world of the party closed back over the moment like water over a stone. But I was still standing next to that trash can, and inside it, buried under torn wrapping paper, a 45-year-old music box was still playing a wedding song to no one. There are moments in life when how you respond says everything, not about the other person, but about yourself. I've repaired watches and clocks for 40 years. Customers used to bring me pieces they'd dropped, sat on, left out in the rain. Mechanisms that had been handled like they had no value at all. And I learned early that the worst thing you can do when something precious gets mishandled is panic or rage or make a scene that ends up hurting the very thing you're trying to protect. You pick it up. You check if it still works. You take it somewhere safe. I stood up from my chair and walked to that trash can. The room went quiet in a strange way, not silent but held, like 80 people had collectively decided to keep talking, while also watching every single thing I did next. I could feel Brooke's phone swinging toward me. I didn't care. I reached in and lifted the music box out. It had landed on crumpled gold ribbon and torn paper. A smear of something sticky had caught the lower corner of the walnut casing. At last, was still playing inside, slower now, the way old mechanisms sound when they've been jostled, winding toward the last few notes. I turned it upright, and the melody steadied itself, warm and unhurried like it had all the time in the world. I reached into my breast pocket for the handkerchief Eleanor had given me on our 35th anniversary, white cotton, my initials stitched in the corner in her careful navy thread. I folded it twice and began cleaning the sticky residue off the wood, slow and deliberate, the way you'd clean a watch crystal you'd spent months restoring. Victoria's voice came from behind me, lighter than I expected, almost confused. "Oh, did you want it back? I mean, that's totally fine, She gave a little laugh, the kind people use to fill a silence they didn't expect. "It genuinely doesn't fit what we're going for with the nursery." I kept my eyes on the walnut casing. "What are you going for?" "Clean lines," she said. "Modern. Everything coordinated. You know how it is." "I do," I said. I turned the box over and cleaned the bottom edge. Eleanor knew how it was, too. She had very specific ideas about what belonged where. That landed differently than Victoria expected. I saw her shift her weight in my peripheral vision. I'm sure she did, she said a little carefully now. I didn't mean any disrespect. It's a lovely old piece. It's just not really our style, I said. Right. That's all right. I slipped the music box back into its cloth bag and fastened the buckle. Some things aren't meant for every house. I heard Daniel's voice, then low and tight from somewhere to my left. Dad. Just my name. The way he used to say it when he was 12 and knew he'd done something he couldn't take back. I turned and looked at my son. His face had gone the color of old plaster. His drink was hanging loose in his fingers, and his jaw was working like he had words backed up behind his teeth that couldn't decide whether to come out. The party is beautiful, I told him. And I meant it. I looked him straight in the eyes when I said it, so he'd know I wasn't being cutting. Victoria did a wonderful job. Congratulations to both of you on Noah. Dad, He stopped, pressed his lips together. I should have said something. You should have. I agreed. No heat in it, just the truth. His face crumpled at the edges, something raw, working its way up through the careful composure he'd spent the afternoon maintaining. I didn't know what. He shook his head. I didn't know how to. I know, I said. We'll talk, not here. He nodded slowly, like a man accepting a sentence. I found Martha near the door. She'd been watching the whole thing with her arms crossed tight over her chest, and her chin lifted the way Eleanor used to lift hers when she was holding herself together by force of will. As I approached, she reached out and put both hands around mine, the hand holding the cloth bag, and squeezed hard. Harold, she said, her voice rough at the edges. I am so sorry. That was... She stopped, swallowed, tried again. Eleanor would have handled it better than either of us, I said. You know that. Martha let out a breath that was almost a laugh, and almost something else entirely. She would have found a way to make Victoria feel like the whole thing was her own idea. Her eyes were bright and wet. That was always her gift. It was, I said. What was in the box, Harold? Her voice dropped low just for me. She told me she was putting something inside, but she never told me what. I'll tell you soon, I said. Not here, not like this. Martha studied my face for a moment, with those sharp, Eleanor-colored eyes. Then she nodded once firmly, like she was agreeing to trust me on something important. You call me tonight, she said. I will. She squeezed my hands again and let go. I said a quiet goodbye to the two older couples seated near the door, neighbors of Gail's, who'd watched the whole thing with careful, neutral faces and said nothing, which I respected, and I walked out of that room with my back straight and the cloth bag firm in my hand. The September air outside hit me like cool water against my face. I stood on the stone steps of the rented estate for a moment, just breathing. The sounds of the party leaked out through the tall windows, laughter resuming, music starting up again. The world of that afternoon rearranging itself and moving on. I walked to the Buick and placed the cloth bag on the passenger seat. Eleanor's seat. I put both hands on the steering wheel and sat there while the engine idled. From somewhere inside the bag, faint as a whisper, I could hear the last few notes of At Last finishing their run. The mechanism winding itself down to silence the way it always did when no one remembered to wind it back up. I thought about what Eleanor had made me promise in that hospital room. The exact words. The way her hand had felt wrapped around mine when she said them. Make them find it, Harold. Make it mean something. She had trusted me to get this right. And somewhere between Providence and Newton, I had badly underestimated what I was walking into. I put the car in drive and headed for the highway. The bag sat on Eleanor's seat and said nothing. And I had 60 miles to figure out what I was going to do with everything that was inside it. Everything Victoria had just thrown away without knowing she'd thrown anything away at all. The highway back to Providence runs straight through the kind of New England countryside that looks the same in September as it does in every other month. Stone walls along the fields. Old maples just starting to turn at the tips, farmhouses set back from the road, like they've been there so long They've forgotten they were ever built. I've driven that stretch 1,000 times. Eleanor used to fall asleep in the passenger seat somewhere around the Attleboro exit and wake up right as we crossed into Rhode Island every single time, like her body had its own internal map of home. I kept one hand on the wheel and one eye on the cloth bag sitting where she used to sit. And somewhere around that same exit, I started talking to her. Out loud. I know how that sounds. But 45 years of marriage leaves a groove in you that doesn't fill in just because the other person is gone. And sometimes the only way I can think clearly is to think out loud to Eleanor. I lost it, I told her. I know you said make them find it. I tried. I'm sorry. And then because that's what she always did when I apologized for something I couldn't have prevented, I heard her voice in my head, that dry, patient voice she saved for moments when I was being too hard on myself. Harold Bennett, you didn't lose anything. You walked right back over and picked it up. That's not losing. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. I laughed a little alone in the car on Route 95, which probably looked insane from the outside. Then my chest tightened, and it wasn't funny anymore. I started thinking about the last afternoon I'd spent with her. Really spent with her the way you spend time with someone when you both know time is running short. It was a Tuesday in March, the windows of her hospital room letting in that thin, watery, late winter light that Rhode Island does in the early spring. She'd been at Rhode Island Hospital for 11 days by then, and she'd stopped pretending she was going to leave on her own 2 feet. I pulled my chair up close to the bed the way I did every afternoon, and she reached over and put her hand on top of mine. Her hands were still warm. That always surprised me those last weeks. Her hands stayed warm right to the end. I need you to get something for me, she said. Anything. The music box. From the shelf in the bedroom, the walnut one with the brass key. I looked at her. Eleanor, I know what it is, she said. And she smiled that specific smile that meant she'd already thought this through 6 ways and wasn't interested in being redirected. That's exactly why I want it. Will you bring it tomorrow? I brought it the next day. She held it in her lap for a long time before she spoke again, turning it over in her fingers, running her thumb along the edge of the walnut casing, the way she used to trace the spines of books she loved. You gave this to me on our wedding night, she said. You carried it in your coat pocket through the entire reception, and you were terrified you'd sat on it. I did sit on it, I said. Twice it survived. She laughed a real laugh, the kind that still lit her whole face up even in that hospital room, even then. It always did. She set it gently on the blanket beside her. When Noah is baptized, I want you to give this to him. Put it in his hands. Let the music play. That's the circle closing Harold from the night we began to the day our first grandchild is welcomed into this world. My throat had gone tight. Eleanor, don't, she said firmly but not unkindly. Don't do the face. I can't stand the face. What face? The one where your eyebrows do that thing, and you look like a basset hound. She reached up and pressed her palm flat against my cheek, warm and steady. This is a good thing I'm asking you to do, a happy thing. You're going to give our grandchild a piece of us. That's not sad. I covered her hand with mine and held it there. Is there anything else inside the box, I mean? Should I add something? She shook her head, and something flickered across her face, not quite a smile, but close to one. A private look, the kind she wore when she knew something I didn't yet. It's already taken care of, she said. Just make sure they open it properly, Harold. Make them find what's inside. Make it mean something. I frowned at her. What's inside? She patted my hand and closed her eyes. You'll see when you get home. I asked Martha to show you where everything is. Eleanor, you'll see, she said again, softer this time, already drifting toward sleep. Trust me. I sat there holding her warm hand until visiting hours ended, and I drove home that night, turning her words over and over in my mind. Make them find what's inside. Make it mean something. By the time I pulled into the driveway on Sumner Street, I already knew I was going to do exactly what she asked. What I didn't know yet was how much was already waiting for me in that walnut box. Back on Route 95, the Providence skyline appeared on the horizon, the familiar cluster of lights that has meant home to me for 40 years. I took the exit and wound through the familiar streets past the hardware store, past the old parish church, past the corner where Eleanor used to buy flowers from the same vendor every Saturday morning for 20 years. I pulled into the driveway on Sumner Street and sat in the car for a moment longer, the engine cooling the cloth bag on the seat beside me. "I'm going to make it right," I said, out loud, to nobody, to Eleanor. "I don't know how yet, but I'm going to make it right." The porch light was on. I'd left it on that morning before I drove to Newton, the way Eleanor always insisted we do when one of us was coming home after dark. I picked up the cloth bag, walked to the front door, and went inside. The workshop is at the back of the house, a small room off the kitchen that was supposed to be a pantry when we bought the place in 1987. But Eleanor took one look at my toolboxes stacked in the garage and said, "Harold, if those tools spend one more winter in a cold garage, you're going to blame every bad repair job on the temperature, and I'm not going to be able to argue with you." So she gave me the pantry. It's got one good work, light, a long bench, a magnifying lamp on a swing arm, and 37 years of accumulated small things, watch parts in labeled trays, tiny screwdrivers in order of size, a wall of clock faces waiting to be rehung. Eleanor used to stand in the doorway sometimes and watch me work, leaning against the frame with a cup of tea, not saying anything, just being there. I still half expect to see her in that doorway every time I walk in. I set the cloth bag on the bench, unlatched it, and took the music box out. In the workshop light, the walnut casing glowed a deep reddish brown, the grain running in long, even lines that I'd spent 2 weeks sanding and re-oiling back in April. When I'd first brought the box home after Eleanor passed, the casing had been dry at the edges, and the brass mechanism had needed new tension. Spring's 45 years of regular use will wear a clockwork mechanism down to almost nothing. I'd ordered the springs from a specialty supplier in Vermont, the same one I'd been using since 1991. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because before I'd touched a single spring or sanded a single edge, I'd found the compartment. I set the box face down on the bench now and reached for the small, flathead driver in the second drawer, the one I'd used that first time back in April, when I'd turned the box over to assess the casing and noticed that the base panel was ever so slightly thicker than it needed to be. A fraction of an inch. The kind of thing only a watchmaker would notice. I remembered that moment with complete clarity. The way my fingers had pressed the corners in sequence top left, bottom right, the old cabinet maker's trick for hidden panels, and felt the soft click as the panel released. "Lord above," I'd said out loud alone in this same workshop to nobody, because inside the compartment, packed carefully into a fitted space that Eleanor must have had custom made, was a bundle of United States savings bonds held together with a blue rubber band. Blue, her favorite color, and 2 envelopes. One sealed, one not. I'd sat down on my stool and just stared at it for a solid minute, my heart hammering before I picked up the open envelope. Inside was a single folded note card in Eleanor's handwriting, the handwriting I'd been reading for 45 years, that precise looping cursive she'd developed from decades of writing comments on children's homework. I'd read it then in April, and I read it again now at my bench on the night of the baptism, with the house quiet around me and the workshop light throwing everything into sharp relief. 30 years of music lessons, Harold. Every month, a little at a time from my own account, the one you always called my mad money and thought I spent on books. I started the year Daniel turned 10. I always knew there would be a grandchild someday. I wanted that child to have a head start that no one could take away. The bonds have all matured now. Martha knows the total. Ask her. My hands had been shaking in April when I first read that. They were steadier now, steadier with grief having settled into something duller and more permanent. But my chest ached the same way. 30 years, I said out loud, to the empty workshop, to Eleanor wherever she was. 30 years and you never said a word. I picked up the savings bonds and fanned them out on the bench. Series E bonds, the paper kind. The government had stopped issuing paper savings bonds in 2012, which meant these went back far enough that Eleanor had been buying them when you could still walk into a bank and purchase them over the counter, one at a time in denominations of $50 or $100. Each one had a purchase date stamped on it. The oldest was from 1993. Noah hadn't been a thought in anyone's mind in 1993. Daniel had been a teenager eating us out of house and home and leaving his cleats in the kitchen doorway. And Eleanor had been quietly, patiently buying $50 savings bonds every month and tucking them away in a hidden compartment in a music box, waiting for a grandchild who didn't exist yet. I put the bonds back and picked up the sealed envelope. For Noah. Open on your 18th birthday. With all my love, Grandma Eleanor, her handwriting, her care. A letter from a woman who had known she might not live to meet the person she was writing to and had written to them anyway, had written with such specificity and such love that the letter existed as its own kind of promise. I had not opened it. I would not open it. That letter belonged to a boy who was currently 3 months old and had no idea that his grandmother had been thinking about him since before his father learned to drive. I set it back in the compartment and closed the panel with my thumb. The soft click of the mechanism settling back into place sounded very loud in the quiet room. Martha had confirmed the total when I'd called her in April, calm and matter-of-fact, the way she gets when she's trying to hold herself together. $47,000. Not quite the 50 Eleanor had aimed for, but close enough that it took my breath away. $47,000 saved on a schoolteacher's salary a little at a time over 30 years. I sat with that for a long time in my workshop. That night, the bonds back in their compartment, the box closed, my hands resting flat on the bench. Somewhere in that house on Sumner Street, the night was very quiet, and Eleanor was very gone, and a young woman in Newton had just thrown $47,000 into a trash can without knowing she'd thrown anything away at all. My phone buzzed on this corner of the bench. I turned it over. A text from Martha. Call me when you're home. I need to know you're all right. And then 2 minutes later, before I'd had time to pick up the phone, it rang. Not Martha's number. Daniel's. The phone screen lit up with Daniel's name, and I sat there on my workshop stool looking at it for a long moment before I set it face down on the bench. Not yet. I wasn't ready yet. Because here's what no one tells you about receiving a phone call. You've been half dreading for months. You need a minute to decide who you're going to be when you pick it up. Whether you are going to be the father who's been hurt or the father who still believes his son is worth saving. Those are two different conversations, and I'd only ever wanted to have one of them with Daniel. I sat there with the phone buzzing against the wood and thought about the Daniel I'd watched grow into a man and the Daniel I'd watched over the last 6 years quietly become someone else's version of himself. Let me take you back. Because to understand that phone call, you need to understand what led up to it. Not just the baptism, the months before it. The conversations I kept having with a son who was asking me questions I didn't fully understand until it was too late to miss what was underneath them. It started in April, about 3 weeks after Eleanor's funeral. Daniel called on a Wednesday evening, I remember, because I was in the workshop retensioning the springs on a mantel clock a woman from Barrington had brought in, and I had grease on my fingers when I answered. "Hey, Dad." His voice had that careful quality he'd developed over the last few years, measured like a man who's learned to think before he speaks, because the person he lives with grades him on what he says. "How are you holding up?" I'm all right, I said. Working. It helps. Good. A pause. Listen, I've been thinking the house on Sumner Street is a lot of space for one person. Have you thought about whether it makes sense to, downsize? I could connect you with a realtor Victoria knows. She's very good. She sold 3 properties in your neighborhood last year, and the market is— Daniel, I said. Yeah, your mother has been gone 23 days. A beat of quiet, then softer. Right, sorry. That was too soon. A little, I agreed. But he called back in June and in July, and each time the conversation had a similar shape, starting with, "How are you, Ad?" Sliding gradually toward, "Have you thought about the finances? Dad and Eleanor must have had some savings, Dad. Maybe we should sit down with someone together." Each question was reasonable on its own. Each question was the kind of thing a careful son might ask. But they had a direction to them, a cumulative lean. And I'm 70 years old, and I've been reading the direction of things my whole career, the way a mechanism pulls left when the mainspring is wound too tight, the way a clock loses 30 seconds a day when the balance wheel is off by a fraction. I noticed. I didn't say anything. I kept answering his questions with shorter and shorter answers and watching to see if he'd notice what he was doing. He didn't. Or if he did, he didn't stop. In August, he came to visit in person, just him. Victoria was at some event in Boston, and for about an hour it was almost like the old days. He sat on the back porch with me and had a beer, and we talked about the Red Sox and a water stain on the garage ceiling that I kept meaning to fix, and a movie Eleanor had made us both watch twice because she loved it. He laughed the way he used to laugh, loose and easy from the chest. Then he walked through the workshop on his way to use the bathroom, and on his way back, he stopped in the doorway where Eleanor used to stand, and his eyes went to the music box on the shelf. The one I'd already finished restoring by then, the one with the bonds and the letter and the photograph sealed inside it. "That's the old box," he said. "Mom's right. Mine originally," I said. "I gave it to her on our wedding night. She asked me to hold on to it." Huh. He studied it from the doorway. His eyes had a calculating quality that hadn't been there when we were talking about the Red Sox, a narrowing that reminded me with a small pang in my chest of conversations I'd had with Victoria about catering deposits and investment accounts. "She didn't leave anything in it, did she? Like anything valuable?" My hands stayed completely still on the clock I was working on. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged too casually. "Just curious. Mom always had a way of, tucking things away. Little surprises." "She did," I said. "Your mother was full of surprises." He nodded and moved on back to the porch, back to the easy version of the afternoon. But the easy version was gone for me after that. Not because Daniel had done anything I could point to and call wrong, but because I'd spent 40 years fixing mechanisms, and I knew the sound of a clock that was running on someone else's winding. I picked the phone up off the bench. Daniel's call had gone to voicemail. I looked at the notification for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything I hadn't said to him over those 5 months. Every careful neutral answer I'd given instead of the direct question that had been sitting in my chest since April. Who taught you to look at your father's house and see square footage? Who taught you to look at your mother's things and see inventory? I set the phone down again and rubbed my face with both hands, pressing the heels of my palms against my eyes until I saw sparks. Because the answer to that question wasn't simple. And being angry at the answer wasn't going to bring back the son who'd sat on my porch and laughed from his chest about a water stain on a garage ceiling. I picked the phone back up and called him back. Daniel answered on the first ring. "Dad, hey, I wasn't sure you'd—" "I'm here," I said. "I needed a minute." "Right." His voice was tight, controlled. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. But before we talk about what you called about, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said a long time ago." A pause. "Okay. I want to talk about Victoria. The silence on the line changed quality, became more careful, more guarded. What about her? Not the way you're thinking, I said. Sit down, Daniel. I mean it. This is going to take a few minutes and I want you to actually hear it. I heard him shift, heard the sound of a chair. Okay, I'm sitting. I looked at the workshop ceiling for a moment, gathering the words I'd been arranging for months. Because if I was going to say this, I was going to say it right. I know where Victoria comes from, I said. Not from her, she's never told me directly. But I've been paying attention for 6 years, and I've talked to enough people and I know the shape of it. South Boston. A mother who worked herself down to the bone. A father who wasn't around. Growing up in a neighborhood where you learned very early that the way people look at you depends entirely on what you're wearing and what you're driving and what zip code you can claim. Daniel made a sound that wasn't quite an agreement and wasn't quite a denial. Dad, I'm not criticizing her, I said firmly. I'm explaining her. There's a difference. A person who grows up like that, who fights that hard to get out to build something that looks like the life she was told she'd never have, that person isn't shallow. That person is afraid, genuinely deeply afraid, that if the wrong person looks too closely, they'll see the girl from the triple-decker on East Broadway who couldn't afford the right clothes for school picture day. A long exhale on the other end. She told you about that? She didn't have to. I watched her for 6 years. My chest ached saying it the way it aches when you say something true that you wish wasn't true. The brands, the Instagram, the nursery aesthetic, the way she handles every social event, like a performance she's been rehearsing, that's not who she is, Daniel. That's armor. And today in that room, her armor made a decision her better self might not have made. But the armor doesn't know the difference. Daniel's breathing had gone uneven on the other end of the line. Dad, he said, and his voice cracked right down the middle of the word, jagged and raw. I should have stopped her. I was right there, and I didn't. I know, I said. I keep seeing it. His voice broke higher, desperate. I keep seeing the box going in, and I keep thinking 4 steps, Daniel, 4 steps, and you could have. I just stood there. Dad, I just stood there, and I laughed. The pain in his voice hit me like a fist to the sternum, and I pressed my free hand flat against the workbench to steady myself. Because that's the thing about watching your child hurt. It doesn't stop mattering just because they're 38 years old. It never stops mattering. You laughed because it was easier, I said. You've been choosing easier for a long time. I know. His voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. I know I have. That's not a character flaw, I said. That's a habit. Habits can be broken. Can they? He laughed bitterly, a short, ugly sound. Because right now, I feel like the worst version of myself that has ever existed. Mom's last... He stopped, swallowed audibly. What was in the box? Dad, Martha said something about money. She said Mom would have been heartbroken. I need to know what I let happen. And there it was. The question I'd been sitting with all evening. The question I'd known was coming since the moment I'd watched Daniel's mouth close in that reception hall. I took a breath. I looked at the music box on the bench, closed and quiet, holding 30 years of Eleanor's patience inside its hidden compartment. Before I answer that, I said carefully, I need you to understand something about your mother. She wasn't a woman who did things by accident. Every choice she made on purpose, including this one. And what I'm about to tell you isn't meant to make you feel worse than you already do. It's meant to make sure you understand what she was trying to give. Dad! His voice was fraying at the edges now, the tight control unraveling thread by thread. Please, just tell me. I closed my eyes. I saw Eleanor's face, the hospital room, the thin March light, her warm hand over mine. Your mother started saving money the year you turned 10, I said. Every month from her own teaching salary, a little at a time. Savings bonds. Daniel, the old paper kind, bought at the bank. She did it for 30 years. She said she always knew there would be a grandchild someday, and she wanted that child to have a head start no one could take away. The sound that came from Daniel's end of the line wasn't quite a word. It was something lower than that, something gut level, like the sound a person makes when something knocks the air completely out of them. The bonds have matured. I continued, my voice steady because one of us needed to be steady right now. Martha confirmed the total for me back in April. $47,000. Plus the letter your mother dictated from her hospital bed, a letter for Noah to open on his 18th birthday, and our wedding photograph. All of it sealed in a hidden compartment in that music box. Oh God! His voice had gone to pieces entirely now, shaking apart in my ear. Oh God, Dad, I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. She saved for 30 years. He was crying openly now, not trying to hide it, big ragged breaths between words. 30 years, and Victoria and I just stood there, and Daniel. My voice came out firmer than I intended, and he went quiet. Listen to me. The box is here. On my bench. I have it. Everything inside it is exactly where Eleanor put it. Nothing was lost tonight. Do you understand me? Nothing was lost. A shuddering exhale. Then small and wrecked. Are you sure? I picked it up out of that trash can myself, I said. I have it. It's safe. He cried a little more after that, the relieved kind, the kind that's mostly exhale. And I sat in my workshop and let him, because sometimes that's the only thing a father can do. Wait for the storm to pass. Be the thing that doesn't move while everything else shakes. When he'd gotten himself mostly back together, I said quietly, I have one question for you, Daniel, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay? Rough voice, raw edges. Are you crying right now because of what almost happened to your mother's gift? I paused. Or because of what almost happened to $47,000? The line went absolutely still. Before I tell you what happened, when Daniel finally answered my question, the one about whether he was crying for his mother or for the money I need to take you back to that morning. The morning of the baptism. Because there are things I haven't told you yet, and things that happened before Victoria ever touched that music box that you need to know in order to understand why I didn't stop her, why I didn't warn her, why I walked into that room believing things would go differently than they did. I left Providence at 10:30 that Sunday morning, with the cloth bag on the passenger seat and Eleanor's voice in my head. I'd been up since 5 the way I always am, and I'd sat with my coffee at the kitchen table for a long time before I got dressed, turning the morning over in my mind, the way you turn a coin. Heads, this goes exactly the way Eleanor hoped. Tails, something goes wrong, and I don't know what yet. I pulled into the circular drive of the rented estate in Newton at 11:50, a full 30 minutes, before the guests were expected. The place was a colonial-style mansion, set back from the road, behind an iron gate, the kind of property you can rent by the day for events, the kind with a name on a brass plaque by the driveway. I'd looked it up after Daniel mentioned it. $4,000 for the day. $4,000 to host a party for a 3-month-old baby. A young woman in a black apron was arranging champagne flutes on a table near the entrance. A florist's van was parked along the side of the house, 2 people unloading tall white peonies in glass vases. I sat in the Buick for a moment, watching all of it come together, and I thought, Eleanor, you would have hated every inch of this and found a way to love it anyway. I found Martha near the back of the reception hall, already seated, her blue dress neat, and pressed her hands folded in her lap. Eleanor's hands. Same shape, same way of holding still when there's nothing to do but wait. My chest tightened when I saw her. Harold? She stood up and hugged me properly, both arms the way she always has. She smelled like the same soap Eleanor used, and for just a second I had to press my eyes shut and breathe through it. You look tired. I'm fine, I said into her shoulder. I didn't sleep much. I never sleep the night before something important. She pulled back and looked at my face, studying it with those sharp eyes. You have the box. Right here. I patted the cloth bag. She reached out and touched it through the fabric. Just briefly, fingers pressing lightly against the shape of the walnut casing, and her eyes went soft and wet at the corners. She'd be so happy today, she said, her voice rough. Whatever happens with all the fuss and the flowers, she'd just want to hold that baby. I know she would, I said. We found our seats near the edge of the room, the grandfather and aunt section, and watched the hall fill up around us. Victoria arrived from the back of the house in a cream-colored dress, her dark hair pinned up, moving through the space with the focused energy of a general surveying a battlefield. Her friend Brooke, a tall young woman with her phone already raised, the kind of person who documents everything as it happens, because living through it once isn't quite enough, followed 2 steps behind. Victoria's mother, Gail, a sharp-featured woman in her early 60s, who'd introduced herself to me at the wedding. With the price of her jacket worked smoothly into the first sentence, stationed herself near the gift table like a sentry. She had the same watchful quality as her daughter, the same rapid calculation behind the eyes, except where Victoria's calculation was mostly about image, Gail's had a harder edge to it. Property. Value. What's this worth? It's quite a production, Martha said quietly, leaning close. It is, I agreed. Eleanor would have found the baby and sat in the corner with him the whole time, Martha said. She wouldn't have cared about any of this. I laughed, a real one, short and aching. She'd have had Noah out of whoever's arms he was in within 3 minutes of arriving. 2, Martha said. She was faster than people gave her credit for. Daniel moved through the crowd near the gift table, adjusting a floral arrangement at Victoria's direction, checking the placement of the camera backdrop, nodding at whatever she said, with the practiced ease of a man who has made agreement into a reflex. He was wearing a charcoal suit that fit perfectly, and he looked handsome and capable and like a stranger. I watched him for a long time without his knowing it. I watched the way he moved in that room, efficient, deferential, always 1/2 step behind Victoria, always checking her face before he finished a sentence. And I thought about the boy who used to fall asleep on the couch, watching football with me, who'd called me from his college dorm at midnight because he'd had a bad dream and didn't know why he was calling his dad about it at 20 years old, who'd sat in the hospital corridor outside Eleanor's room and wept into his hands for 20 minutes before he could walk in to see her. That man was still in there somewhere. I had to believe that. Harold, Martha touched my arm. She's about to start. Victoria had taken her position in the white chair, the throne as I'd come to think of it, and Brooke had planted herself center stage with the phone raised. Gail straightened up near the gift table and rolled her shoulders back, ready. The gift opening began. Each box came forward with its brand name and its ribbon. Each one was lifted for the camera. Each one got the room's applause on cue. I sat with the cloth bag on my knee and watched, and I felt the particular loneliness of being the only person in a room who is not performing. Then Gail lifted my bag. From Grandpa Harold, she announced, and I heard it, that gentle, particular condescension, the tone you use for a child who has drawn you a picture you'll throw away when they're not looking. I stood up. My knees ached slightly the way they do in the cold. I picked up the cloth bag, and I walked toward my daughter-in-law's throne, and I thought, make them find it, Eleanor. That's what I'm doing. I'm making them find it. So that's how the morning went. That's what I walked into, and that's what I walked out of with my back straight, and Eleanor's music box in my hand. And 60 miles of highway between me and the worst afternoon I'd had since the hospital. I want to tell you what those 60 miles felt like because they matter. I've already told you about that drive. The highway. The skyline, Eleanor's voice in my head somewhere around the Attleboro exit. What I haven't told you is what Martha said when she called, because that conversation mattered more than the miles. She reached me before I'd made it past the Dedham exit. "Harold, thank God!" Her voice came through the car speakers sharp and strained. "I've been standing in the parking lot for 10 minutes. Where are you?" "On 95, I said, heading home. Are you all right?" "Your hands weren't shaking, were they?" "When you walked out, I couldn't tell if you were—" "My hands are fine," I said. "Martha, breathe." A long exhale. "I am breathing. I'm breathing very loudly and not gracefully at all, but I'm breathing." A pause. "Harold, I want you to know that what Victoria did in there was one of the ugliest things I have witnessed in 67 years of being alive on this earth, and I include some genuinely terrible things in that list." "I know," I said, and Daniel just stood there. Her voice cracked on it, hot and furious. He stood there and he laughed. His father's gift, Eleanor's gift, went into a trash can, and he laughed. Harold. My jaw tightened. My hands pressed harder against the wheel. I saw. I wanted to say something. I was 2 seconds away from walking across that room, and "I'm glad you didn't," I said. "Not there. Not like that." "Why not?" The hurt in her voice was real. The hurt of a woman who loved Eleanor like a sister for 60 years and had just watched something Eleanor made get treated like garbage. Why does she get to stand there and perform for that camera and face no consequences at all? "She will," I said quietly. "Just not in that room, not on Brooke's phone." A silence. Then Martha said softer, "You already have a plan." "I have the beginning of one. The box is safe, on the seat next to me." She made a sound that was equal parts relief and grief, a short, choked exhale that turned into something almost like a sob before she caught it. "Oh, thank God. Harold, I was so afraid you hadn't gotten to it in time that it had—" "I got there," I said. "Everything's exactly where Eleanor put it. Nothing was lost." "Okay." Her voice was steadying, coming back down from the edge. "Okay, good. That's okay. Go home, Martha," I said gently. "Have some tea. I'll call you tonight." "You'd better," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare go quiet on me. I mean it." "I won't," I said. "I promise." She hung up and the car went quiet again. Just road noise and the hum of the engine and the cloth bag sitting on Eleanor's seat. I drove for a while with nothing but my own thoughts for company, which was both necessary and uncomfortable, the way an honest conversation with yourself usually is. Because here's what I was sitting with: two things that were both true at the same time, and that pulled in opposite directions hard enough to make my chest ache. The first thing was that Victoria had done something genuinely cruel. Not malicious, not calculated, but cruel in the way that thoughtless things can be cruel. Which is sometimes worse because there's no malice to be angry at just a void where consideration should have been. The second thing was that none of what Victoria had thrown away had actually been lost. The bonds were in that bag. The letter was in that bag. The photograph was in that bag. Eleanor's 30 years of patience and love were in that bag on the seat beside me exactly as she'd left them. And that meant I still had the chance to do what Eleanor had asked me to do. To make them find it. To make it mean something. The question was how. I turned off the highway at the Providence exit and wound through the familiar streets, the hardware store, the church, the flower vendor's corner where Eleanor used to buy dahlias on Saturday mornings. And by the time I turned onto Sumner Street, something had settled in my chest. Not peace exactly, but direction. The specific clarity that comes when you've been turning a problem over long enough that the solution presents its own shape. I parked the Buick, lifted the cloth bag from Eleanor's seat, and walked to the front door. Inside the house was quiet. I hung my jacket on the hook by the door, the hook Eleanor had installed herself, because I kept draping things over the banister, and she'd refused to live with it, and I carried the bag through to the kitchen, set it on the table, and put the kettle on. The phone was already buzzing in my pocket. I set it on the counter without looking at it. I made my tea. I sat down. I wrapped both hands around the warm mug, and then I picked up the phone. Not Daniel's missed call. Not yet. I needed 5 more minutes with the quiet before I was ready for whatever that conversation was going to cost me. Because I already knew, sitting at that kitchen table with my tea going warm in my hands, that the conversation with my son was not going to be simple. It was not going to be quick. And it was going to require me to ask him a question that I was terrified to hear the answer to, a question about whether the man he'd become in 6 years of marriage was still somewhere underneath all of it, the man Eleanor and I had raised. I finished my tea. I set the mug down, and I called him back. Before I tell you what Daniel heard that night, what made a grown man break down in a parking garage at 10 o'clock, I need to know, are you still with me? Drop the number 9 in the comments right now. Just a 9. That's all. It tells me you're here, and honestly, it means everything. One more thing worth mentioning: the story ahead carries some fictional threads woven in to give it shape and meaning. If that's not for you, no judgment, step away now. But if you're staying, hold on tight. He picked up on the second ring. Dad. His voice was already unsteady, the kind of unsteady that tells you a person has been sitting with something terrible for the past hour and barely holding the lid on it. I wasn't sure you'd call back tonight. I said I would. I told him. I was at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone lukewarm, the cloth bag on the table in front of me. How are you doing? A short, hollow laugh. Honestly, I've been sitting in my car in the parking garage for 45 minutes because I couldn't figure out how to walk back into the apartment and look Victoria in the face. My chest tightened at that. Not with satisfaction, I want to be clear about that. There was nothing satisfying about hearing my son describe himself as a man hiding from his own wife in a parking garage. It just hurt. Are you still there now? Yeah. His voice dropped. It's cold. I don't care. Daniel. Dad, Martha said something to me before she left. She said Mom would have been heartbroken about what happened to the money in the box. His voice cracked on the word money, a jagged little fracture right down the middle of it. What money? What's in there? Because I've been sitting here for 45 minutes, running through every possible thing it could be, and none of it, I need to hear it from you. Please. I set my mug down. I pressed my free hand flat on the table, steadying myself, the way I do before a difficult repair. Find your center first, then work. All right, I said. I'm going to tell you everything, and I need you to listen all the way to the end before you say anything. Okay, barely a whisper. Your mother started saving money the year you turned 10, I said. Every month without fail from her own teaching account, the one she always called her mad money, the one I thought she spent on books and didn't ask about, because she deserved to have something that was just hers. I paused. She was buying savings bonds, Daniel. United States savings bonds, the paper kind at the bank. $50 here, $100 there. Every month for 30 years. The breathing on the other end of the line changed, got slower, heavier, like a man bracing himself against something he can feel coming. She said she always knew there would be a grandchild someday. I continued. She wanted that child to have a head start that nobody could take away. Something solid. Something that would grow and wait and still be there when it was needed. My throat tightened and I pushed through it. The bonds have all matured. Martha confirmed the total for me back in April when I found them. $47,000, Daniel, in a hidden compartment in the bottom of that music box. Along with the last letter your mother ever wrote, a letter for Noah to open on his 18th birthday so that a boy who will never meet his grandmother can sit down someday and hear from her anyway. And our wedding photograph. June 12, 1979. The sound that came from the other end of the line wasn't a word. It wasn't even really a sound. It was the noise a person makes when something reaches into their chest and squeezes a short, choked exhalation like the air being pushed out of something that's been punctured. $47,000, Daniel said, and his voice was so wrecked it barely made it across the line. 30 years. 30 years, I confirmed. And Victoria. He couldn't finish the sentence. His voice broke into pieces halfway through, and he stopped trying to control it. He just cried. Openly, raggedly, with the kind of full-body grief that a man only lets himself show when he's alone in a cold parking garage and thinks no one can see him properly. She threw it away, Dad. She threw Mom's, she threw 30 years into a garbage can, and I just stood there. I laughed. I actually laughed. I know, I said. How are you not furious with me? His voice surged back up, raw and desperate. I was right there. 4 steps. I could have walked over in 4 steps and taken it back before she even... Daniel. My voice came out firm and steady, the voice I used when he was a boy, and spiraling and needed something solid to grab onto. Stop! Listen to me. Listen. He stopped. I could hear him trying to breathe. The box is on my kitchen table, I said. Everything your mother put inside it is exactly where she left it. The bonds are there. The letter is there. The photograph is there. Nothing was lost tonight. Do you understand me? Nothing was actually lost. A long shaking exhale. You got it out. I got it out, I said. I walked over and I took it back and I brought it home. It's here. It's safe. Oh God. The relief in his voice was so palpable I could feel it through the phone, a loosening, a release like a cord that's been pulled taut for hours, finally going slack. Oh, thank God, Dad. I thought when Martha said the money, I thought it was gone. I thought the whole thing had been... It wasn't, I said. It's here. He breathed through that for a moment, getting himself back together piece by piece. Then quieter. What are you going to do with it? I'm still deciding, I said. Which was true, I had the shape of a plan, but not yet all the details. But I need to ask you something first, Daniel. And I need you to be honest with me, even if the honest answer is hard. Okay? Wary now, braced. When you called me tonight, I said carefully. And I told you about the $47,000, were you crying because of what almost happened to your mother's last gift to her grandson? I let the question breathe for just a moment. Or were you crying because of what almost happened to $47,000? The parking garage went utterly quiet on his end. I could hear the distant sound of a car somewhere in the structure, a door echoing. Daniel didn't make a sound for a long time, not because he had nothing to say, but because the honest answer was sitting right there in front of him, and he couldn't figure out how to pick it up. I don't know, he finally said. And his voice, when he said it, was the most honest thing I'd heard from him in years, cracked open. No performance in it, just a man staring at his own reflection and not liking what he saw. Dad, I genuinely don't know. And that scares me more than anything else about tonight. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in a long time, I told him. He made a rough sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, somewhere between the two. That's not a compliment, is it? It's not an insult either, I said. It's just true, and I'd rather have true than comfortable. I shifted in my chair, feeling the quiet of the house around me, the tick of the mantel clock in the living room, the hum of the refrigerator. Daniel, before we go any further, I need to tell you something about how you found out tonight. About what Martha said to you before she left the party. His breathing changed. I've been wondering about that, he said. She looked so rattled when she came over to me, like she'd already said something she wished she hadn't. She had, I said, but not on purpose. She was hurt and angry about what she'd just watched happen, and she said more than she meant to. She told me about it herself later, and she felt terrible. What exactly did she say to me? Daniel asked. Because it hit me so hard and so fast that I'm not even sure I heard it clearly. She said your mother would have been heartbroken if she'd known what happened to the money in the box. I kept my voice level. She didn't mean to say it. It just came out, a heavy exhale. So she knew. She knew about the bonds. Your mother told her sometime before she passed, I said. Not the full amount, not all the details, just that there was something significant in the box, something she'd been setting aside for years. Martha said she assumed it was jewelry, maybe some cash. She had no idea about the bonds until I told her in April. April, Daniel repeated, and I could hear him working through the timeline in his head. So you've known since April. You've been carrying this since April and you never… He stopped himself. You never said anything to us. Your mother asked me not to, I said. She wanted you to find it. She was very specific about that. Make them find it, Daniel said quietly. And it stopped me cold, not because he'd said it, but because of how he said it. Like he recognized the phrase. Like he'd heard it before. How do you know those words? I asked, a pause. Because she said it to me too, Dad. His voice had gone very quiet, something fragile in it now. Last February, about a month before she got really bad, I drove up to see her alone. Victoria was at a conference in Chicago. Mom and I had lunch in her room. I brought her the clam chowder from that place on Thayer Street she always liked. He stopped and I could hear him steadying himself. She told me she'd hidden something for the baby. She said, make sure they find it, Daniel. Don't let it get lost. I asked her what she meant, and she just smiled and said I'd understand when the time came. My eyes went hot and prickly. I pressed my free hand against my mouth for a moment before I trusted my voice again. She never told me she'd said that to you. I never told her I didn't know what she meant, he said, and his voice was raw with it now scraped clean of everything that wasn't pain. I thought maybe she meant a piece of jewelry or a letter or something. I thought when the baptism came it would be obvious. I'd see it. His voice broke on the last word. I saw it, Dad. I saw her put it in the trash and I stood there and I laughed. Daniel, I knew something was supposed to be found, he said, voice rising and cracking at the same time. She told me. She told me directly, and I forgot. I got caught up in the party and the camera and what Victoria would think, and I forgot what my own dying mother told me, and then I stood there and watched it go into the garbage. A sound came out of him, then raw and wretched like something tearing, and I gripped the phone tighter and felt my own throat close up. How do I, Dad? How do I come back from that? The same way you come back from anything, I said, and my voice wasn't entirely steady anymore. One day at a time, starting tonight with being honest about it. He cried for a while after that, not the controlled, careful kind, but the real kind, the kind that makes a noise and doesn't apologize for it. And I sat in my kitchen and let him, because I'd learned a long time ago that a father's job isn't always to fix the pain. Sometimes it's just to stay on the line while it passes through. When he finally got his breath back, he said, "What are you going to do with the money, Dad, with the box?" I told you, I said. I'm still deciding, but I'll tell you this much, it's going to Noah. All of it. Every cent your mother saved. That was always where it was meant to go, and that's where it's going. Victoria. He stopped, started again. Victoria doesn't know any of this yet. No, I said. She's going to… He exhaled sharply. I don't even know what she's going to say. She's going to try to explain it somehow. She's going to make it something other than what it was. Probably. I agreed. That's her way. It's how she protects herself. I paused. Your job is to decide whether you let her this time. A long silence, the kind with weight to it. The kind a man sits in when he's being asked to look at himself clearly and not look away. I need to go in, he finally said. I need to talk to her. Yes, I said. You do. Dad. His voice went quiet again, and young in a way it hadn't been in years. I'm sorry. For today. For all of it. I know you are, I said. Get some sleep, Daniel. We'll talk more tomorrow. I set the phone down on the table and pressed both hands flat against the wood, feeling the grain of it under my palms, solid, real, unchanged. The mantel clock ticked in the next room. The house was very quiet, and somewhere across the city, my son was walking back into his apartment to have the conversation that should have happened hours ago. I picked up the cloth bag and carried it back to the workshop. I set it on the bench. I sat down on my stool, and I looked at the walnut box in the lamplight, and I thought about Eleanor sitting in her hospital bed, telling our son to make sure it was found. She'd trusted both of us to get it right. Tomorrow I was going to start figuring out how to deserve that trust. Martha lives 20 minutes from my house in Cranston, the same house she and Eleanor grew up in, a white Cape Cod on a corner lot, with a magnolia tree in the front yard that blooms every April, whether anyone pays attention to it or not. Eleanor used to say that house was the most reliable thing in her life. I called Martha at 7:30 the next morning, and she told me to come over right away and she'd have coffee on. She opened the door before I'd finished climbing the porch steps, still in her housecoat, her silver hair not yet pinned up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and raw. She'd been crying, or hadn't slept, or both. "Come in," she said, and grabbed my arm like she was steadying herself. "Come in, Harold. I've been up since 4. I stepped inside. The house smelled like coffee and the particular warmth of a kitchen that's been in use for 60 years. "Martha, you should have slept." I couldn't. She steered me toward the kitchen, her hand still on my arm. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that music box going into the trash. I kept thinking, what if you hadn't gotten to it? What if someone had taken the bag out before you? Her voice cracked and she pressed her lips together hard, fighting it down. "Sit. I'll pour." I sat at the kitchen table, the same table Eleanor and I had sat at 100 times over the years. The same yellow tablecloth, the same sugar bowl shaped like a rooster that their mother had bought at a church fair in 1968. Martha set a mug in front of me and dropped into the chair across both hands, wrapped around her own cup, and looked at me with eyes that were trying to be steady and not quite managing it. "Tell me everything," she said. "Start from when you left the party. Don't leave anything out." So I told her. All of it. The drive home, the workshop, finding the bonds still intact, Martha's own call, and then Daniel's. I told her about the conversation with Daniel about Eleanor having said, "Make sure they find it," to him too back in February, about the question I'd asked him and the answer he couldn't give me. By the time I finished, Martha had tears running freely down her face, not bothering to wipe them. "She told him too," she said, her voice thick. "Of course she did. She was thorough to the very end, that woman. She never left anything to chance." "She left too much to chance," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "She trusted people to do the right thing, and one of them didn't." Martha reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her grip was fierce. Eleanor's grip, the same strength in the fingers. "Don't," she said. "Don't you blame yourself for honoring what she asked you to do. You did exactly what she wanted. The other thing, that's not on you." "It's on Daniel," I said. "Partly." "Yes," Martha said firmly, no softness in it. "It is, partly." She let go of my hand and sat back. "What did he say when you asked him whether he was crying for Eleanor or for the money?" "He said he didn't know." I turned my mug in my hands. "And he said that scared him more than anything else." Martha stared at me for a moment. Then something shifted in her expression, not quite hope, but the beginning of it. "That's actually the right answer," she said. "A man who was purely after the money would have had a ready answer. He would have insisted. The fact that he didn't know means there's still something in there worth reaching." "I want to believe that," I said. "Then believe it," she said sharply, the way Eleanor used to when I was being stubborn about something I already knew the answer to. "Harold Bennett, that boy adored his mother. He adored both of you. He has made some terrible choices in the last 6 years, and he stood in that room yesterday and did a thing he cannot undo, but he is not a lost cause. He is a man who got lost. There is a difference. My eyes went hot. I looked down at my coffee. "You sound like her," I said. "Good," Martha said, and her voice broke on the word, wide open, no armor left in it. "Good, because someone around here has to." She put both hands over her face and cried properly for a moment, the kind of crying that's been held in since the parking lot, the night before, finally finding its way out. Her shoulders shook. I reached across and put my hand on her arm and left it there. After a minute, she lowered her hands and wiped her face with the hem of her housecoat and gave a shaky laugh. "All right," she said. "All right. I'm done. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to protect the money," I said. "For Noah, the way Eleanor intended." Martha straightened. "How?" "I'm going to set up a trust," I said. "An education trust, a legal arrangement where the money is held by an independent administrator locked specifically for Noah for his education and his future. His parents can't access it, can't borrow against it, can't redirect it. It exists for the child and only for the child available to him when he turns 18. I paused. "I have an appointment this afternoon with our family attorney, a man named Robert Callahan, who handled Eleanor's estate and has known us since 1992. He'll know how to structure it properly." Martha was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You're locking Daniel out too," she said. "Yes," her jaw worked. "That's going to hurt him." "I know it is," I said. "And I'm sorry for that. But Eleanor saved that money for the grandchild Martha, not for the grandchild's parents. And the cleanest way to honor what she built is to make sure no one, not Daniel, not Victoria, not even me, can bend it away from where she aimed it." Martha looked at me for a long moment, her eyes still wet at the edges, her coffee cooling in her hands. Then she nodded once, slow the way you nod when something costs you something, but you know it's right. "She picked the right person to keep it safe," she said quietly. "She didn't have a lot of other options," I said. Martha laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, and it sounded so much like Eleanor that I had to set my mug down and press my hand against my sternum for a second, just to hold myself together. "You call me after Callahan," she said. "I want to know everything." "I will," I said. "And Martha," I met her eyes across the yellow tablecloth. "What you said to Daniel in the parking lot, about the money in the box." Her face tightened immediately, a wash of guilt crossing it. "Harold, I am so sorry. I never meant to. It just came out. I was so upset, and he was standing right there." "You did nothing wrong," I said. "You told him something true, and he needed to know." I paused. "Everything that happened last night happened because of what you said, and I think it needed to happen." She pressed her lips together, fighting a fresh wave of tears. "Okay," she managed. "Okay. Good." I finished my coffee, stood up, and buttoned my jacket. Martha walked me to the door, and at the threshold, she hugged me again, hard. Both arms, the way she had yesterday, the way that still smelled like Eleanor's soap. "Go take care of it," she said against my shoulder. "Go lock it down tight." Robert Callahan's office is on Westminster Street in downtown Providence, on the third floor of a building that used to be a textile warehouse and still has the original brick walls inside. I've been going there since Eleanor and I drew up our first wills in 1992, back when Daniel was in middle school, and we'd finally admitted to ourselves that we were actual grown adults who needed to think about these things. Robert was waiting for me at the door of his office when I arrived, a compact, gray-haired man in his late 60s with a handshake like a vice grip and the unhurried manner of someone who has spent 30 years listening to people talk about the most important things in their lives. He'd attended Eleanor's funeral. He'd shaken my hand at the graveside and said, "She was one of the finest people I've known, Harold. I mean that." I'd believed him. "Harold," He gripped my hand and held it for a moment. Sit down. Tell me what you need. I sat across from his desk, and I told him everything. The music box, the baptism, Victoria's performance, the bonds, Eleanor's letter, the hidden compartment. I laid it out in order the way I'd explain a repair job, no excess, no drama, just the facts and what I needed done. Robert listened without interrupting, his hands folded on the desk, his face doing what good lawyers' faces do, absorbing everything, showing nothing until he was ready to show something. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me steadily. You want an irrevocable education trust, he said. Beneficiary is your grandson Noah. The savings bonds converted to cash value transferred into the trust principal. No parental access, no exceptions. That's exactly what I want, I said. I'll serve as independent trustee, he said. Which means neither you, nor Daniel, nor Victoria can direct the funds. The trust exists solely for Noah's benefit, educational expenses, qualified living costs during school, a lump sum distribution at 18 if he chooses not to pursue higher education. Clean, airtight, exactly as your wife intended. He paused. Since the bonds are titled in Eleanor's name, I'll handle the estate redemption first, straightforward, given that you're the sole executor of her will. Once redeemed, the funds transfer directly into the trust. He paused. You understand that means you're locked out too, Harold. Not just them, you. I understand, I said. That's what I want. Robert studied me for a moment, with those steady gray eyes. Most grandparents struggle with that part. Eleanor didn't save that money for me to control, I said. She saved it for Noah. The trust is just making sure it gets to him the way she aimed it. Something moved in Robert's expression, respect maybe, or recognition. All right, he said. I'll have the draft documents ready by end of week. We'll need the bonds brought in for conversion. I'll walk you through the Treasury redemption process. It's straightforward. Paper bonds like these go through the bank directly. The total after conversion and trust establishment fees will be somewhere in the range of $45,000 to $46,000, depending on current redemption values. That's fine, I said. One more thing. He leaned forward. Have you told your son? I'm going to, I said, after the documents are drawn. Robert nodded slowly. That conversation is going to be difficult. Most important ones are, I said. I left his office an hour later with a manila folder of preliminary paperwork and the particular lightness that comes from having set something in motion that can't be reversed. The afternoon sun was hitting the Westminster Street brick at a low angle the way it does in September, making everything look warmer than it is. My phone rang before I reached my car. Daniel, I answered. I was going to call you this evening. I know. His voice was different from the night before, still raw at the edges, but steadier. The voice of a man who had slept a few hours and done some thinking. I talked to Victoria last night. How did that go? A long breath. About how I expected. She said you should have told us what was in the box before the party. She said no reasonable person would assume a music box had $47,000 hidden inside it. She said... He stopped. She said it wasn't her fault. I kept my voice even. What did you say? I said she was right, that she didn't know what was inside. His voice tightened. And I said that was irrelevant. That she stood up in front of 80 people and threw a gift from my dead mother into a trash can because it didn't photograph well. And that whether or not she knew what was inside it, she knew who it came from. He exhaled hard. She didn't take that well. I imagine not, I said. She cried, Daniel said, and his voice was complicated when he said it, not without sympathy, not without exhaustion. Not the performing kind, the real kind. She kept saying she didn't mean it that way. She wasn't thinking, she just reacted. And He stopped. I believe her dad. I think she genuinely didn't think. And I think that's almost worse somehow. It is worse, I said quietly. Cruelty with intention you can argue with. Cruelty from reflex means the reflex needs to change. Yeah, a beat. She hasn't apologized to you. She says she doesn't know how to. She doesn't need to apologize to me, I said. She needs to understand what she threw away. Those are different things. I paused. Daniel, I've just come from my attorney's office. I'm setting up an education trust for Noah. The $47,000 goes directly into it, locked until he turns 18. Independent trustee, no parental access. That means you and Victoria cannot touch it, not for any reason, under any circumstances. A long pause. Including me. Including you, I said. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it because your mother saved that money for a child, not for a child's parents. The trust is the only way I can be certain it gets to him the way she intended. Quiet on the line. Then, and this surprised me, Daniel said, "Good." One word. No argument, no pushback. "Good," I repeated. "Yeah, Dad." His voice was tired and honest and more like himself than I'd heard in years. "Good. Honestly. Because if you'd handed it to us after everything that happened yesterday, I wouldn't have trusted myself not to let Victoria talk me into something stupid with it. So good. Lock it. Make sure it gets to Noah." A pause. It's what Mom wanted. My throat tightened so fast I had to look up at the sky for a moment. The September blue over Westminster Street, wide and clear and indifferent the way sky always is. "Yes," I managed. "It's exactly what she wanted." "Dad?" His voice dropped. "Victoria wants to know if you'll still come to dinner next week. Like nothing happened." "Not like nothing happened," I said. "But yes, I'll come." A pause. "Why?" "Because Noah is my grandson," I said. "And because your mother would expect me to." I changed my mind 3 days after talking to Callahan. Daniel had suggested dinner at their place in Boston, his way of extending something that looked like an olive branch, or maybe Victoria's way of keeping the conversation on her home turf, where she controlled the lighting and the layout and what came out of the kitchen. I'd said yes in the moment on the street outside Callahan's office because I didn't have a better answer ready. But by Wednesday, I knew I wasn't going to Boston. I sent Daniel a text that evening, short and direct: Sunday dinner at my place instead. 6 o'clock. Bring Noah. He replied within 2 minutes. "Okay, Dad. No pushback, no negotiating. Just okay." Which told me Daniel had already told Victoria something, and whatever he'd told her, she'd understood enough not to argue. Martha arrived at my door Thursday afternoon, with her sleeves already rolled up, and a look on her face that said she'd been waiting for something useful to do all week. I let her in, and she walked straight to the kitchen, surveyed the counter, and turned around with her hands on her hips. "Pot roast," she said. It wasn't a question. "Eleanor's recipe," I said. "The one with the red wine and the thyme." Martha's eyes went soft and a little wet at the corners, but she blinked it back fast. "She made that every time she wanted someone to drop their guard," she said. "I've eaten that pot roast after funerals, after arguments, after the time our father had that health scare in '94, and the whole family spent 3 days being terrible to each other." She pulled her cardigan tighter. "She always said good food makes people remember they're on the same side." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm making it." Martha looked at me steadily. "Are you on the same side as them?" "I'm on Noah's side," I said. "And I'm on Eleanor's side. And I'd like to believe those are the same thing as Daniel's side if he can find his way back to it." She nodded slowly, then turned to the refrigerator and got to work without another word. That's one of the things I've always valued about Martha. She knows when talking is over and doing has to begin. We worked in the kitchen for most of the afternoon, me at the counter breaking down the chuck roast, Martha at the stove softening the onions and carrots in butter, the way Eleanor always started it low and slow, until the whole kitchen smelled like something good was coming. At some point, Martha started talking about Eleanor without meaning to, a memory surfacing the way they do when your hands are busy and your guard is down. She called me the week before she went into the hospital the last time, Martha said, stirring without looking up. I didn't know it was going to be the last good call. She sounded almost normal. She asked me if I thought Daniel was happy. Her voice dipped. I said I thought he was doing fine. She said, Martha, there's a difference between fine and happy, and I'm not sure my son knows that yet. My hands went still on the cutting board. She never told me she said that. She worried about him, Martha said. Not in a blaming way. Just a mother thing. She could see something she couldn't fix, and it bothered her. She finally looked up, eyes bright. I think the box was part of that. I think she was trying to give him a reason to remember who he was before all the other stuff got in the way. I pressed the heel of my hand against the counter for a moment, steadying. That's Eleanor, I said. Always trying to fix things from 3 steps ahead. Always? Martha agreed, and we both laughed, the aching kind, the kind that's mostly love and mostly missing. I got the roast into the Dutch oven around 4 and left it to do what it does. Martha and I sat at the kitchen table with tea while the house filled up with that deep, wine-dark smell, and I took the music box out of the cloth bag and set it on the table between us. Martha looked at it for a long time without touching it. Are you going to open it in front of them? She asked. Yes, I said. All of it. The bonds, the letter, the photograph, all of it, I said. In front of everyone, the way Eleanor asked. Martha pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling for a moment, composing herself. She's going to try to defend herself, she said. Victoria, she's not going to just sit there. I know, I said. Let her. She can say whatever she needs to say. The truth is going to be on the table regardless. And Daniel? I turned the music box over in my hands, feeling the familiar weight of it, the smooth walnut under my thumbs. Daniel is going to have to decide something Sunday night, I said. I can't decide it for him. I can just make sure he has everything he needs to make the right choice. Martha reached across and covered my hand, the one holding the box, with both of hers. Her grip was warm and fierce. She would be so proud of you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I want you to know that. Whatever happens Sunday, she would be so proud. I couldn't answer that. I just turned my hand over and held hers back, and we sat like that for a while with the pot roast doing its work on the stove and Eleanor's music box between us on the table, and the Sunday that was coming feeling both very far away and very close. They arrived at 6 o'clock exactly. Daniel's punctuality inherited from me, which Victoria had never quite managed to override. I heard the car in the driveway from the kitchen and went to the front door, and there was my son on the porch steps with Noah in his arms, bundled in a navy blue sleeper, eyes open and working hard at the complicated business of existing in the world. And behind Daniel, 1 step back, was Victoria in a dark green wool coat, her hair down, no camera, no Brooke, no performance infrastructure of any kind. Just a woman in a green coat standing on my porch, looking like she hadn't slept well in a week. Come in, I said. I stepped back and held the door open. Daniel came in first, and I reached for Noah immediately, the way grandfathers do, the way it's a reflex before it's a decision. Daniel transferred him to my arms, and Noah looked up at my face with that solemn, ancient expression that babies have when they're deciding what they think of you. His eyes were Eleanor's color. They'd been Eleanor's color from the day he was born, and they hadn't changed yet. Hello, young man, I said to him quietly. We've been waiting for you for a long time. Noah blinked at me and made a small sound deep in his chest, exploratory, like he was testing out the acoustics of a new room. Martha, standing in the kitchen doorway, with a dish towel in her hands, let out a sound that was half laugh and half something much more tender, and crossed the room to peer at him over my shoulder. Oh, he's got her nose, she said, her voice catching. Harold, look at his nose. I see it, I said. Victoria had stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She stood in my front hall with her coat still on, looking at the house the way people look at places they've been before but are seeing for the first time under different light. Her eyes moved from the family photographs on the wall, Eleanor at every age Daniel growing up in, increments the two of us at Nantucket, in 1995 to the doorway of the living room, to the kitchen beyond it, where the smell of the pot roast was filling the whole downstairs. "It smells incredible in here," she said. Her voice was careful, calibrated, but not unkind. "Eleanor's recipe," I said. "You can put your coat in the closet." She did, quietly without comment. Dinner was, I want to be honest about this, almost normal. Martha had set the table properly with the good plates Eleanor bought at an estate sale in Bristol in 2003, and the candles she kept in the sideboard drawer. And we sat down, and I served, and we talked about Noah's sleep schedule, about Daniel's current project at the firm, about Martha's neighbor, who was finally selling the eyesore of a house 3 doors down from her. Victoria ate 2 full servings of the pot roast and said with something that sounded genuinely surprised, "This is the best thing I've eaten in months." "The wine is the secret," Martha told her. "Eleanor always said, don't be stingy with the wine in a braise. Whatever you drink, put in the pot." Victoria almost smiled. Almost. There was something working in her face all through dinner, a tension beneath the politeness, a waiting quality like a person who knows the weather is about to change and is tracking the horizon. Daniel was quieter than usual. He ate steadily and answered questions, and once when Noah fussed in the baby carrier Martha had set up in the corner, he was up from his chair before anyone else moved, checking, settling, murmuring to his son, with a gentleness that made my chest ache, with something that wasn't pain exactly. Something more like recognition. There was the man Eleanor had raised, still in there, still capable of it. Martha caught my eye across the table when Daniel sat back down. She gave me the smallest nod. I waited until the plates were cleared and the coffee was poured. I waited until everyone had the particular fullness and warmth that comes after a good meal, and before dessert, the physical state of people who are for the moment comfortable. Eleanor had always said that was the time to say the hard things, not when people were hungry or defensive, but when they were full and warm and slightly off guard. I reached across the table and put my hand flat on the music box. It had been sitting there the entire meal on its square of white cloth between the salt and the bread basket, visible to everyone, commented on by no one. The moment my hand touched it, the quality of the room changed. Victoria's chin came up. Daniel set his coffee cup down. Martha straightened in her chair. "I'd like to give Noah his gift from his grandmother, I said. My voice was level and unhurried. Properly this time, the way Eleanor asked me to before she died. Victoria's jaw tightened just slightly, a small, involuntary clench, the face of a woman who has been waiting for this moment and is now discovering that waiting for something doesn't make it easier to receive. "Harold," she started. "Let me finish," I said gently, but without any give in it. "Please." She closed her mouth. Her hands came together on the table in front of her fingers, laced tight. Daniel looked at the music box. Then he looked at me. His eyes were dry, but there was something in them, a braced quality. A man standing in a doorway. He knows he has to walk through and taking one last breath before he does. "Okay, Dad," he said. "We're listening." I reached into my jacket pocket for the small flathead screwdriver. I set it on the table beside the music box, and I turned the brass key. The first notes of At Last rose into the quiet kitchen of my house on Sumner Street, and Martha pressed both hands over her mouth, and Victoria's carefully maintained composure cracked right down the middle of her face, and Daniel's hand came up to cover his eyes for just a moment before he pulled it back down. I had opened this compartment alone before, in the quiet of my workshop, under the magnifying lamp, with nobody watching, and nothing at stake except my own grief. This time was different. This time 8 eyes were on my hands, and the stakes were the size of everything Eleanor had ever tried to build. I turned the box face down on the white cloth and picked up the small, flathead screwdriver from beside it. The table had gone completely still. No one reached for their coffee. No one shifted in their chair. Even Noah and his carrier in the corner had gone quiet, as though the room's held breath had communicated itself to him somehow. Your mother had this compartment built into the box sometime in the 90s, I said, my voice steady and unhurried. A local cabinet maker in Providence did the work. I didn't know it existed until I brought the box into my workshop after she passed. I pressed the 4 corner points in sequence, top left, bottom right, the cabinet maker's trick, and the base panel released with a soft, clean click that seemed very loud in that kitchen. Victoria flinched at the sound. Her hands laced together on the table tightened until the knuckles went pale. I reached into the compartment and took out the bundle of savings bonds. First a thick stack rubber-banded in blue, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges, the way paper does when it's been kept safe and dry for 30 years. I set them on the white cloth in the center of the table. United States Savings Bonds, I said. Series EE. Your mother bought them at the bank a few at a time starting in 1993. Every month for 30 years from her own teaching salary. I spread the edges of the stack so the purchase dates were visible, row after row of them, years stamped in government ink, going back to before Daniel had finished high school. When they mature, they're worth $47,000. Robert Callahan, our family attorney, has already begun the process of transferring the full amount into a locked education trust for Noah. Daniel stared at the bonds like a man looking at something he can't make his brain accept. His jaw was working. His eyes had gone bright and wet at the rims. 47,000, he said, barely audible. 47,000, I confirmed. Victoria made a sound, a short, sharp intake of breath, and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. I reached into the compartment again and took out the sealed envelope. Eleanor's handwriting on the front, that precise looping cursive for Noah. Open on your 18th birthday. With all my love, Grandma Eleanor. I set it gently beside the bonds. The last letter your mother ever wrote, I said to Daniel. She dictated it to me in the hospital a few weeks before she died. A letter for a boy she knew she might never meet. A letter she wanted him to have when he was old enough to understand it. I touched the envelope lightly with one finger. This stays sealed until Noah turns 18. It belongs to him. Martha let out a breath that turned into a sob, halfway through a wretched, helpless sound that she tried to catch and couldn't. She pressed her fist against her lips, her whole frame shaking. And then I reached in one last time and took out the photograph. 5 inches by 7, black and white, slightly soft at the edges, the way prints go over the decades. Eleanor and I on the steps of St. Michael's Church in Providence, June 12, 1979. She was 22 years old in that photograph. Her dress was simple, not expensive, just beautiful the way she was always beautiful without trying, and she was laughing. Her head turned slightly toward me, caught in the middle of saying something she thought was funnier than I did. I set it on the table. The 3 of them looked at it, Daniel, Victoria, Martha, and the room felt like the inside of a held breath. This is what was in the music box, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried. 30 years of savings. A letter from a dying woman to a grandchild she might never hold. And a photograph of the night Eleanor and I began. I looked up and let my eyes settle on Victoria, not with anger, not with heat, but with the steady, unmovable weight of a man who has been patient for a very long time and is done being patient about this particular thing. This is what you held in your hands at the baptism. This is what you called old. This is what you threw away. Victoria's face had gone white as the tablecloth. Her mouth opened. I know you didn't know, I said before she could speak. I'm not saying you knew. I'm saying you made a choice about what something was worth before you looked inside it. And this, I gestured at the table, at the bonds and the envelope and the photograph is what was inside it. I didn't. Victoria's voice was unsteady, climbing. You should have told us. Before the party, you should have said something. Who puts $47,000 in a music box and doesn't tell anyone? That's not a reasonable thing to expect people to. Victoria. Daniel's voice came out low and flat, and it stopped her mid-sentence the way a hand on a shoulder stops a person walking. She turned to look at him. His face was a controlled storm jaw, set eyes red at the edges, a man holding himself together by the thinnest possible thread. Stop. Daniel, I said stop. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. The quiet in his voice was harder than any volume would have been. My mother lay in a hospital bed and thought about our son. She thought about him before he was born. She saved for 30 years so he would have something real, something solid, something that would still be there when she was gone. And we stood in that room and His voice fractured on the last word, cracking right down the center. He pressed his fingers against his eyes for a moment hard. I stood there, and I didn't stop it. So don't tell me what Dad should have done differently. Don't. Victoria stared at her husband. Her lips were trembling. Her eyes had filled up, not the performing kind of tears, I could tell the difference by now, the real kind, welling up from somewhere she hadn't intended to open. The kitchen was absolutely still, except for the faint mechanical ticking of the mantel clock in the living room and the soft sound of Noah stirring in his carrier, a small, sleepy sound, completely unbothered by the weight of what was happening 3 feet away from him. The innocence of that sound in that room at that moment was almost more than I could stand. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and took out the second envelope, smaller than the first, unsealed Eleanor's handwriting on the front for the family. Read aloud when the gift is given. Eleanor prepared 2 things, I said. The sealed letter for Noah, which no one opens until he's 18, and this. I held up the smaller envelope. A note she asked me to read to the family on the day the gift was given. That day was supposed to be the baptism. I set the envelope on the table and looked around at each of them in turn. Martha, Daniel, Victoria. It's today instead. Martha made a small sound and pressed both hands flat on the table, bracing herself. Daniel lowered his hands from his face and straightened in his chair, his jaw tight, his eyes red-rimmed but open. Victoria pressed her lips together hard and lifted her chin, not in defiance, I thought, but in the way a person braces themselves when they know something is coming that they deserve to receive. I opened the envelope. The notepaper inside was cream-colored 3-hole, punched from a legal pad, covered in Eleanor's handwriting, front and back. My hands were steady. They had not been steady the first time I read this alone in the workshop in April, with no one watching. But I had read it 20 times since then, alone in that room with the lamplight, and the silence, getting myself ready for exactly this moment. I cleared my throat, and I read, If you're hearing this, it means our grandchild has finally arrived, and I am so deeply sorry I couldn't be there to make a complete fool of myself crying at the baptism. I've been saving for this baby since Daniel was in his 20s, not because money is the most important thing I could give, but because I wanted Noah to know someday, when I'm just a photograph in a frame, that someone was already thinking of him before he existed, that he was wanted, that he was loved before he took his first breath, before he had a name, before any of us had even dared to believe he was really coming. 30 years is a long time to keep a secret. Harold, if you're reading this, thank you for keeping yours. You always were better at waiting than I was. To Daniel, you were the reason I started saving. The year you turned 10, you came home from school and told me your friend's family had lost everything because they hadn't planned ahead. And you looked at me with those serious eyes and said, Mom, we're going to be okay, right? And I said, yes, of course we are. And then I went to the bank the next morning and bought the first bond. Because I wanted to make sure there was always an answer ready when someone in this family asked that question. To whoever is in this room, be the kind of family that knows the difference between what a thing costs and what a thing is worth. That difference is everything. It is the whole of it. I love you all more than I was ever good at saying out loud. Harold knows. Ask him. All my love, Eleanor. My voice held through the whole thing. I don't know how. By the last line, it was thin and rough and barely there, but it held. Martha was weeping openly, both hands over her face, her whole body shaking with it, the kind of crying that has no vanity in it whatsoever. Just pure, unguarded grief and love running straight through a person with nothing to stop it. Her shoulders heaved. She didn't try to quiet herself, and I didn't expect her to. Daniel had both elbows on the table, and his face buried in his hands. His shoulders were shaking too, the contained, effortful kind, the kind of crying a man does when he's been raised to keep it private, and the private place has finally run out of room. A sound escaped him, broken, the sound of something giving way under pressure. It had held too long. She saved because of something I said when I was 10 years old, he said into his hands, his voice muffled and wrecked. She never told me that. She never once told me. She didn't want you to feel the weight of it, I said. She wanted you to feel the gift. He lifted his face from his hands. His eyes were swollen and wet, and completely unguarded, in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Dad, he said, and his voice broke clean in half on the single syllable. Dad, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. I know you are, I said. It's not enough, he said fiercely, the words coming out jagged. I know it's not enough, but I need you to hear it. I need you to know that I hear it, I said. Daniel, I hear it. He pressed his fist against his mouth and fought himself back from the edge. I turned to Victoria. She was sitting very still, both hands flat on the table now, and there were tears running down her face that she wasn't trying to stop or manage or redirect, just running unchecked the way tears run when a person stops fighting them. Her eyes were fixed on the photograph of Eleanor and me on the church steps, on the young woman laughing in the simple dress. She saved because a 10-year-old boy asked if his family was going to be okay, Victoria said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, rough at every edge. And she said yes. And then she went to the bank the next morning and made sure the answer stayed yes. She swallowed hard. Her chin was trembling. I didn't know. I keep saying that, and I know it doesn't fix anything. But I had no idea what I was holding. I know you didn't, I said. But that's the problem, isn't it? She looked up at me, and her eyes were raw and honest in a way I had not seen from her before, stripped of the performance, stripped of the armor, just a woman sitting at a kitchen table looking at what she'd done. That I didn't even try to find out. That I looked at it and decided what it was worth in 2 seconds, and I never even thought to look inside. The kitchen was very quiet, except for Martha's breathing, and the clock, and Noah, who had fallen back asleep in his carrier, with one tiny fist pressed against his cheek, absolutely at peace with the world. No, I said gently. You didn't, but you're looking now. Victoria pressed both hands over her face and cried. Really cried, not gracefully, not quietly. And Daniel reached across the table and put his hand on her arm, and she grabbed it and held on. The last word of Eleanor's letter still hung in the air like smoke from a candle just blown out, the kind that drifts and lingers and refuses to let the room forget what it just witnessed. My voice had cracked on Harold knows. Ask him. And I hadn't tried to hide it, hadn't swallowed it down the way I might have 10 years ago. I was too old for that now. Too tired of pretending that pain was something a man was supposed to manage quietly. My hand was trembling when I set the paper down on the table. Not from age. From the weight of it, 30 years of Eleanor's love compressed into 2 handwritten pages. And now the words were out in the open, released into a room that wasn't sure what to do with them. Martha pressed a folded napkin hard against her eyes. Her shoulders shook with the effort of holding herself together. She was losing that effort, and honestly, I didn't blame her one bit. Daniel had both hands pressed flat against the tablecloth, staring down at the grain of the wood like a man trying to anchor himself to something solid. His jaw was locked. His eyes were red and wet and blinking fast the way a person blinks when they know if they stop, something will break through that they won't be able to pull back. Victoria sat perfectly rigid in her chair, arms crossed tight against her chest, spine straight as a woman bracing for impact. Her face was carefully composed, but her left hand was gripping her own wrist so hard that her knuckles had gone completely white, the skin stretched thin over bone. I picked up the music box. The walnut wood was warm under my palms, warm the way something gets when it's been held and handled and loved over decades. I set it directly in the center of the table, where everyone could see it, where no one could pretend it wasn't there. "Now," I said, and my voice came out harder than I expected. Sharper, like a man who has finally decided he is done waiting, we talk about what happens next. Daniel looked up at me. His voice broke on the first syllable. "Dad, I don't even know where to start." "Then let me start," I said, "because I have been carrying this since March. Since the morning I stood in that hospital room and said goodbye to your mother. And I am done carrying it alone." I reached beside my plate and pulled the manila envelope I'd set there before dinner. From it I drew out 3 pages, crisp and official, signed at the bottom, by Robert Callahan, dated October 14th, 2025. "This," I said, laying it flat on the table so every person in that room could read the heading, "is an irrevocable education trust." I smoothed the edge with one finger. "The $47,000 in savings bonds that your mother built over 30 years, dollar by dollar, bond by bond, through every year, you were in college, through your wedding, through every promotion, every new house, every milestone she celebrated for you. That money is now locked inside this trust for Noah. He receives it when he turns 18, not before, not for any other purpose, not accessible to anyone else, not for any reason under any circumstance." Victoria's chin lifted sharply, her eyes cutting to mine. "Harold, I'm not finished." My tone wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. It had the kind of weight that doesn't require volume, the finality of a door swinging shut on a cold night. "Victoria, I'm going to say something to you directly, and I need every word to land." She held my gaze. Her jaw tightened, working slowly like someone grinding down on something they couldn't quite swallow. "I don't believe you're a bad person," I said carefully. "I believe you grew up in a house where nothing came easy, where you had to fight for every single thing you had, and somewhere along the way you never learned how to stop fighting, even when the war was already over. Even when the people around you weren't your enemy. I understand that." Eleanor understood it better than I did, honestly. She had more grace for it than me. I paused, letting that sit for a moment before continuing. "But what you did at that baptism, picking up that box, looking at it, and dropping it into a trash can, while the music was still playing, that was not a misunderstanding. That was not an accident. That was a choice. And choices have weight." Victoria's eyes went bright and sharp with something that wasn't quite tears. Something harder. Something closer to the surface than she wanted it to be. Her voice, when she spoke, came out clipped and tightly controlled. "I didn't know what was inside it. That," I said, meeting her eyes without flinching, "is exactly the problem." Daniel made a sound, low in his throat, something between a groan and a sob. The sound of a man trying to contain something too large for the space he'd put it in. "Dad, please." "Daniel." I turned to face my son fully, and when I looked at him, I saw something that nearly undid me. He looked exactly the way he had at 11 years old, the afternoon he'd accidentally sent a baseball through Eleanor's kitchen window, and stood in the backyard with his hands hanging at his sides, unable to speak. That same hollow guilt. that same desperate, aching wish to reach backward in time and undo something that was already done. Do you remember what your mother said to you in February before she was admitted to Rhode Island Hospital for the last time? He closed his eyes. His chin trembled visibly. She said she was worried about me, he whispered. She said I was becoming someone she didn't recognize anymore. She told me the same thing. My throat tightened around the words. And she was not wrong, son. She was not wrong. Martha exhaled long and slow and shuddering, the sound of a woman releasing something she had been holding for months. She loved you anyway, I said. That is what the letter was. That is what 30 years of quiet saving was. Not strategy, not leverage, not an investment. It was love. The kind that keeps showing up even when it isn't deserved. But love is not the same as permission. And I will not allow her sacrifice to be disrespected a second time. Not while I'm still standing. Victoria's voice cracked slightly now, the armor developing fractures she couldn't entirely control. So you're punishing us. That's what this is. You're cutting us out. I'm protecting Noah, I said simply. There is a difference, Victoria. And somewhere when you're quiet enough to hear yourself think, you already know that. I slid the trust document to the center of the table next to the music box. Both of them sitting there together, one made of walnut and brass, one made of legal language and intention, both saying the same thing in different languages. The trust is already signed and executed. Robert Callahan serves as independent trustee. Neither of you has access, not today, not in 5 years, not ever. Noah receives the full amount, plus accrued interest when he turns 18 years old. I held the pause for a full 3 seconds. That is not negotiable. It was never going to be negotiable. Daniel pressed his fist slowly against his mouth. His shoulders caved forward, like a man who had been holding his breath since September and had finally completely run out of air. A low, cracked sound left his chest, and then his eyes filled all the way, and he stopped trying to blink it back, and 2 tears ran straight down his face without apology. I'm sorry, Dad. His voice was barely sound. I am so genuinely sorry. Something inside my chest split open, not cleanly, not painlessly, but wide and sudden, the way grief moves when it's been waiting in a room just off the hallway, and you finally open the door. Not anger, not satisfaction, just raw, unguarded sorrow for the time lost, for the man my son had almost become, for the woman who had loved him through all of it and never once stopped. I know you are, I said quietly, and your mother knew it too. That is precisely why she left the box. Victoria slowly uncrossed her arms. She pressed both palms flat against the tablecloth, fingers spread wide. Her breathing had shifted slower, now heavier, the sound of someone working to swallow something that kept rising back up. Martha reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her fingers were warm and steady. Eleanor would be so proud of you, she said softly. I didn't have words for that. I just looked at the music box in the center of the table, walnut wood worn smooth at the corners. Brass fittings dulled with age, the thin repaired crack along the right side that I had glued back together in my workshop on a quiet April night, and I thought she already knew exactly how this would end. She built it this way. She always did. We are not done as a family, I said at last. But we are done pretending that everything is fine when it isn't. We are done letting things go unsaid until it's too late to say them. I looked at Daniel, then at Victoria, then back at the box. That ends tonight, right here at this table. Some things you don't grieve all at once. I learned that in the months after the dinner, after the night, I laid Eleanor's letter on that table and told my son the truth he had been avoiding. Grief doesn't hit you like a wave. It comes in layers, the way old paint peels from a wall in winter, slow, uneven, revealing something underneath you forgot was there. October became November quietly. I made one last drive to Robert Callahan's office on Westminster Street to confirm everything was finalized. The bonds had been redeemed through Treasury. Direct the funds deposited into the trust's dedicated account. $47,000. Eleanor's 30 years of careful, stubborn saving, legally untouchable, waiting for a boy who wouldn't understand any of it for another 17 years. Callahan shook my hand at the door. She planned it well, he said. She planned everything well, I told him. I just had to catch up. Martha called on a Thursday morning, her voice carrying something I hadn't heard from her in a long time. Genuine brightness, the kind that only comes when something you've been praying for finally moves. Daniel called me last night, she said. He and Victoria are seeing a counselor. Together. Daniel said it was his idea. I set down my coffee mug slowly. My chest did something unexpected, not quite joy, but something warm right beside it. He told me he couldn't keep being the man Victoria needed, Martha continued, until he figured out who he actually was first. My eyes went blurry. I blinked hard. That sounds like something Eleanor would have told him, I said. I know, Martha replied softly. The second he said it, I thought the same thing. Victoria called on a Sunday afternoon in mid-November. Her name on my screen still made my stomach tighten. Old instinct, the kind that doesn't disappear overnight. But I picked up because Eleanor's voice lived somewhere in the back of my mind. You don't have to like someone to extend them grace. Harold? Her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it, like she had set something heavy down and wasn't sure yet whether to pick it back up. I know nothing I say can fix what I did. I know that. You're right, I said. There isn't anything. A pause stretched between us. Then, I grew up believing that if something didn't cost money, it had no value. My mother raised me that way. I didn't know she was wrong until I saw what was inside that box. My throat tightened. My hand pressed harder against the phone. The letter wasn't written for you, I said carefully. But I'll tell you what Eleanor said. She hoped Noah would grow up knowing the difference between things that truly last and things that only look like they do. She said the box was never about money. Victoria made a sound, soft, fractured something finally giving way. I know that now, she whispered. I'm sorry, Harold. I truly am. I believed her not completely, not yet. Trust doesn't rebuild in a single phone call. But she meant it in that moment, and that was enough to work with. Come to Christmas, I said. Bring Daniel. Bring Noah, she cried quietly. We'll be there, she said. They arrived on Christmas Eve. Daniel carried Noah in a red fleece onesie, and the baby's eyes were wide and dark and curious. Eleanor's eyes, exactly that deep, warm brown I had fallen in love with 46 years ago. Martha had filled the Sumner Street house with cedar branches and white lights, and Eleanor's pot roast had been slow cooking since noon, making every room feel dangerously close to the past. We ate. We laughed real laughter, the unplanned kind that rises from somewhere deep and surprises everyone. Martha told the story of Eleanor trying to teach her stick shift in a church parking lot and knocking over a full row of folding chairs. Daniel laughed until his eyes watered. Even Victoria laughed openly, genuinely, nothing like the careful performance I had watched at the baptism. After dinner, I stepped away to my workshop. When I came back, I stopped in the doorway. Noah was on a blanket on the living room floor, and he had somehow pulled himself close to the small table where the music box sat. His tiny fist stretched upward, fingers spread wide, reaching. I didn't move. I just watched. He reached again. His fingers touched the side of the box, and in that small accidental contact, the lid lifted just slightly, just enough, and the first 3 notes of "At Last" filled the room. Martha's breath caught. Daniel said, "Oh," quietly, just that one word, and something inside me broke open completely. My eyes filled before I could stop them. My chin trembled. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth, and for the first time since that gray March morning, when I had stood beside a hospital bed and said goodbye to my whole world, I wept. Not only from loss, not only that, from knowing she had planned this, that Eleanor had hidden her love inside a walnut box and trusted it would find its way to this floor, this room, these small searching hands. Martha wrapped her arms around me from behind and held on. Daniel pressed his face into his son's hair, voice wet and broken. "Hi, buddy," he whispered. "That was your grandma." I couldn't speak. I let the music play. Outside, snow fell soft on Sumner Street, slow and quiet, the way love covers everything it touches if you allow it. I allowed it. I'm just an old man who fixes watches for a living. I put broken things back together piece by piece, and I try not to rush the process. I thought I knew everything about patience. Turns out I knew nothing about the kind of patience it takes to watch your own family fall apart and trust that God still has a plan for the pieces. Someone wiser than me once said that God doesn't waste pain. I believe that now. Eleanor's illness, the music box, the baptism, the trash can, the bonds, the letter, none of it was random. It was all pointing somewhere. I just had to be willing to follow it to the end. Here is what I want to say to you honestly, as one human being to another. Don't be like me. Don't wait until someone is gone to tell them what they meant to you. Don't let the people you love feel like strangers in your silence. The moment is always right now, not after the diagnosis, not after the funeral, not after the music box ends up in a trash can at a baptism reception. These grandpa stories, these family story moments that seem small and ordinary, are the ones that define everything. A grandpa stories isn't just a story about an old man. It's a family story about what we leave behind and whether it was worth anything. Every grandpa stories I carry, every family story I've lived through, taught me this: love is the only thing that survives all of it. If something in this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own family, your own regrets, your own music box sitting somewhere forgotten, I'd love to hear it. Leave a comment below. Share this with someone who needs it. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because more stories are coming, and some of them will shake you to the core. Thank you truly for staying until the very end. It means more than I can say. A gentle heads up. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements thoughtfully crafted for reflection and meaning. If that's not the kind of content you're looking for, no hard feelings, step away and find what speaks to you best. But if you're staying, I'm glad you're here.